When one of the most famous basketball players on earth quietly disappears for a week. No Instagram posts, no press appearances, no explanation. The world notices. In March 2024, Steph Curry canceled 2 major promotional appearances, told his team to clear his schedule, and boarded a flight to Charlotte, North Carolina. No camera crew, no publicist, no security detail. Just Steph, a gray hoodie pulled low, and an address written on his phone that he had not dialed in 15 years. He was going to see a woman named Renata. Not a headline, not a controversy, not the kind of story that gets broken by a sports reporter or leaked by an insider. This was something quieter than all of that. Something that had been building for 15 years in the background of all the championships and the records and the golden confetti and the roaring crowds. Building in a place nobody was looking, in a city Steph had grown up in the life of a woman most of the world had never heard of. Renata was his first real friend. The first person who ever asked him about himself, instead of his father. The girl who sat in the bleachers of a JV basketball game in 2002 and held up a handwritten sign that made a skinny 14-year-old laugh so hard he missed 2 layups in a row. The girl who was the only person outside his family who knew his real first name was Wardell, and thought it was the funniest and best thing she had ever heard. They had drifted apart the way young people drift, when one of them is about to become something the world has never quite seen before. No drama, no falling out, just 2 rivers that traveled the same path for a while before life sent them in different directions. Steph went to Davidson College, then the NBA draft, then Golden State, then history. Renata went back to Charlotte. She became a 3rd-grade teacher at a school where most of the children came from families who were struggling. She showed up every single day. She remembered every birthday. She kept snacks in her desk drawer for the kids who came to school hungry. She married a firefighter named Jerome, had 2 children named Imani and Ezra, bought a little yellow house on a street called Redbud Lane, and built a life that was quiet and warm and genuinely, specifically good. And then, on the night of October 14, 2021, Jerome went out on a call. He did not come home. He was 34 years old. Renata was 33. Imani was 5. Ezra was 3. And that was when something began. Something that nobody knew about. Something that happened after the children were in bed, and the house went quiet, and Renata went downstairs and turned on a single lamp, and opened a composition notebook bought from the Dollar General on Beatty's Ford Road. Every night, for 2.5 years, the light in that basement was on at midnight, at 1 in the morning, sometimes 2. Her neighbor Gloria noticed it. She worried at first, then she stopped worrying, because she started to understand that whatever was happening in that basement was not the sign of a person falling apart. It was the sign of a person building something. Something that 2 literary agents would reject. Something that Renata covered with an old gray shirt and kept in a plastic bin in the corner, because the world had told her twice it wasn't ready, and she had decided to keep building it anyway. Something that, when a mutual childhood friend finally called Steph Curry on a February morning in 2024 and told him what was in that basement, made Steph cancel everything, board a plane, drive a rented gray Toyota Camry to a yellow house with a bent basketball hoop in the driveway, walk down a set of basement stairs, and sit down on a concrete floor and cry. Not politely, not the kind of tears that cameras catch at meaningful moments. The real kind. The kind that come from recognizing something so true and so extraordinary and so quietly, impossibly human, that your body decides the only honest response is to come apart a little. The whole world would eventually feel exactly the same way. Because what Renata had built in that basement in the dark, after her children were asleep, with colored pencils bought at a Dollar General and composition notebooks, and a love that had nowhere else to go, it didn't stay in that basement. It found its way out. And when it did, 4 million people watched a 63-second video of a Charlotte classroom and couldn't stop crying. School counselors across 43 states ordered it immediately. A hospital put it in every room of their children's ward. Parents wrote 4,000 letters, saying versions of the same thing. I looked for something that said exactly this, and I couldn't find it. And now here it is, and I don't have words for what that means. But here is the thing that makes this story different from every other story about a famous person doing something good. Steph Curry did not create what was in that basement. He did not fund it. He did not inspire it. He did not arrive like a hero with a solution. He arrived like a person who had known someone before the world got complicated, walked down a set of stairs and found something that had been built entirely in the dark by a woman who had lost the most important person in her life and had decided, quietly and without announcement, that love did not end with a person. That it kept going, that it built things, that it found its way into composition notebooks and colored pencil illustrations, and the last page of a book that made a 7-year-old boy in San Francisco ask his father, "Is she okay?" What was in that basement changed the way hundreds of thousands of people understood grief, love, and what it means to leave something behind. And you need to watch this whole story to understand why. Because what Steph found on those basement stairs is only the beginning. What happened after? What Renata built? What the world did with it? What Imani said at a basketball game? What Ezra did with a bird on a porch? And what a single handwritten letter from San Francisco said that made Renata fold it carefully and keep it inside the cover of the book she was still writing. That is the story that will stay with you. Watch until the end. You will understand why. The gymnasium at Charlotte Christian School smelled like rubber soles and old wood, and the particular kind of hope that only exists in places where young people are still figuring out who they are going to become. It was the fall of 2002. The bleachers were half empty. The scoreboard had a flickering 0 on the left side that nobody had bothered to fix. A JV basketball game was happening. Not the kind of game that anyone was going to remember. Not the kind that gets written about or replayed or turned into a highlight. Just 14-year-old boys running up and down a court, trying to prove something to coaches who were mostly looking at their clipboards. One of those boys was skinny, in the way that tall boys sometimes are before their bodies decide to catch up with their height. He had quick eyes and a shooting form that already looked different from everyone else. Cleaner, more deliberate, like someone had taken a blueprint for the perfect jump shot and quietly installed it in his muscle memory while nobody was watching. His name was Wardell Stephen Curry II. Everyone called him Steph. He was not a star yet, not even close. His father, Del Curry, had retired from the NBA the previous year after 16 seasons, the last of which was spent with the Toronto Raptors. Del was the greatest shooter in Charlotte Hornets history. A quiet, steady professional who had made a career out of being exactly right when it mattered. Steph had inherited the shooting gene and the quiet steadiness, but at 14, he had not yet grown into either of them. He was just a boy who loved basketball the way you love something before it becomes a responsibility. He did not make the varsity team that year. This is important, not because failure defines anyone, but because what it felt like matters to this story. Steph Curry, the man who would one day rewrite every record for three-point shooting in NBA history. The man who would win 4 championships and be named the league's first unanimous most valuable player, sat on JV benches in Charlotte, North Carolina, trying to convince coaches he was worth watching. Some days it worked. Some days it didn't. On the days it didn't, he walked to the bleachers after practice and sat alone in the 3rd row from the top, untying and retying his sneakers in the slow, deliberate way that people use their hands when their thoughts are too heavy to hold still. That was where he first noticed Renata. Her full name was Renata Abena Osei, and she was new to Charlotte Christian School the same way Steph was familiar with being new. with the calm, watchful attention of someone who had learned that rushing into a room never shows you the room the way standing quietly at the edge of it does. Her father, Emmanuel Osei, was a history teacher who had taken a position at a different Charlotte school after the family relocated from Columbus, Ohio, the year before. Her mother, Patricia Osei, worked as a registered nurse at Carolina's Medical Center on Blythe Boulevard. They were a family held together by routine and warmth and the shared understanding that education was not a ladder you climbed. It was a foundation you built everything else on top of. Renata had 3 things that made other students pay attention to her without quite knowing why. The first was her laugh. It did not arrive with warning. It came out suddenly, like a door swinging open in a hallway you thought was empty, sudden and warm, and completely genuine. The laugh of someone who was actually listening to what you said, rather than waiting for their turn to speak. The second was her yellow headband. She wore it every day, the bright yellow sitting against her dark braids like a small declaration. Not loud, not asking for attention, just present, consistent. The kind of thing you notice, and then find yourself looking for the next day. The third was her habit of asking questions that landed differently from other people's questions. Not smarter exactly, just more honest. She asked what she actually wanted to know instead of what she was supposed to ask. She was sitting 4 rows up from Steph that afternoon, doing homework with a textbook balanced on her knees and a pencil tucked behind her ear, when she looked up from the page and said, without any particular introduction, "You shoot differently from everyone else on that team." Steph looked up. He was still wearing his practice jersey. He had not expected anyone in the bleachers to speak to him. "Different good or different bad?" he asked. Renata tilted her head and thought about it with the seriousness of someone who understood that the answer mattered. "Different, like you already know something the rest of them are still trying to figure out," she said. Then she went back to her textbook. Steph looked at the empty court for a moment. Then he looked back at her. "I'm Steph," he said. "I know," she said, without looking up. "Your dad played for the Hornets. Everyone knows." There was a pause. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "When people say that instead of just saying who you are?" She was still looking at her textbook. Her pencil had found its way back to her hand, and she was turning it slowly between her fingers, the way people do when they're paying more attention than they appear to be. Steph was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of question nobody had ever asked him directly, even though it was the kind of question that lived in the back of his mind every single day. His father was loved in Charlotte. Del Curry had given that city some of its finest basketball memories. Being Del's son was something Steph was proud of. Genuinely, completely proud. But pride and identity are not the same room, and being someone's son was not the same as being yourself. "Every single day," he said. Renata looked up from her textbook then. She looked at him directly, not with pity, not with the particular excitement of someone who had gotten a celebrity, to be honest, but with the simple, level attention of a person who had asked a real question and received a real answer, and respected what that cost. "That seems exhausting," she said. "It is," Steph said. "Well," she said, returning to her textbook, "I don't know anything about your dad. I only moved here last year, so if you want to be a person for 5 minutes instead of someone's son, I'm not going anywhere." She said it the way people say things when they mean them completely and don't feel the need to dress the meaning up. Steph sat back against the bleacher behind him. "What are you doing homework on?" he asked. "State capitals," she said, "which is boring enough to make a person want to stare at a basketball court instead." "I know all the state capitals," Steph said. Renata looked at him with a single raised eyebrow. "Montana," she said. "Helena," he said, immediately. She checked her textbook. She looked back at him. She moved her backpack 3 inches to the left, the universal language of bleacher seating for "you can sit here if you want," and went back to her page. Steph moved up 3 rows and sat down. What followed over the next several months was a friendship that became something else, slowly and without announcement. The way temperature changes in a room when someone opens a window. Not dramatic, just gradual and real. They studied together in the school library every Tuesday and Thursday after practice, sitting at the round table in the back corner, beneath a window that looked out over the soccer field. Renata was methodical with her notes, color-coded, organized in a way that suggested a person who found order genuinely comforting rather than merely useful. Steph was messier but faster, the kind of student whose notebooks looked chaotic and whose test scores made teachers wonder if they were looking at the right paper. They ate lunch at the same table every day. At first, it was just the two of them plus Marcus Webb, who ate an impressive amount of food for a person of his size, and who had the particular gift of making silence comfortable rather than awkward. Then, gradually, others joined, the way people cluster around warmth without always knowing that's what they're doing. Renata came to every JV game. She sat in the same spot, 3 rows up, slightly left of center, and she brought a handwritten sign the 3rd time she came. The sign said, "Shoot it, Wardell." Steph saw it from the court during warm-ups and laughed so hard he missed 2 layups in a row. Nobody else at Charlotte Christian School knew his first name was Wardell. It was the kind of name that appears on official documents and gets quietly set aside in daily life, the way middle names do. Steph had mentioned it once, casually, in conversation, and Renata had stored it with the precision of someone who understood that small personal details are a form of trust. She used it on the sign because she knew he would understand that she was the only person in those bleachers seeing him. Not the shooting form, not the famous last name, not the kid trying to step out of his father's considerable shadow. Just Wardell. Just Steph. His mother, Sonia, came to one of the JV games that winter, and afterward she saw Steph and Renata standing by the gym doors, talking with the ease of people who have run out of room for awkwardness because they have already said enough honest things to each other. Sonia Curry watched them for a moment and did not interrupt. Later, she told a close friend that the girl had an old soul, the kind that remembers things. It was the most accurate thing anyone would ever say about Renata Osei. They did not have a dramatic ending. No rain, no shouting, no single moment that broke something in a way that could be pointed to later. What they had instead was the quiet, inevitable drift of 2 people when one of them begins to be pulled by forces that were always going to come. The scouts in the stands, the phone calls to coaches, the growing understanding that this boy was going to have a life that operated at a completely different velocity than any life Charlotte Christian School had the vocabulary to prepare him for. Steph got better, and as he got better, the ordinary world got smaller around him, the way a childhood bedroom looks smaller when you go back to it as an adult. By sophomore year, people were talking about him differently. Not just Dell's son anymore, but have you seen this kid? The beginning of the particular hum that precedes fame, the sound the world makes when it starts to suspect it is about to be surprised. Renata did not make a scene. That was not her way. She stopped wearing the yellow headband sometime in the spring of sophomore year. Steph noticed. He did not say anything. The not saying anything was its own kind of conversation that they both understood. By junior year, the drift was complete. Not an ending, something more like 2 rivers that had traveled the same path for a while before the geography sent them in different directions. No bitterness, no damage, just the ordinary mathematics of growing up, which is that you cannot always bring with you every person who helped you become yourself. Steph went on to Davidson College on a scholarship in 2006, where he would astonish the entire country in the 2008 NCAA tournament by carrying a small school to the Elite Eight against teams 3 times its size. He went to the NBA draft in 2009, selected 7th overall by the Golden State Warriors. He went to Golden State and changed the sport. Renata Osei received an academic scholarship to NC State University. She studied education, like her father. She graduated in 2010 and came back to Charlotte. She came back to the city and poured herself into a different kind of work. The quiet, daily, essential labor of teaching children who needed to know that someone had shown up for them. And for 15 years, the two of them lived in separate orbits, the way people do when life has different plans for each of them. Until the February morning in 2024, when Marcus Webb called Steph's cell phone and said there was something he needed to hear. Something that began, of all places, in a basement. The last time Renata Osei walked through the doors of NC State University as a student, she was carrying a rolled-up diploma and wearing a graduation gown that was slightly too long for her and kept catching under her heels. Her mother, Patricia, stood in the crowd in a yellow dress. Renata had asked her specifically to wear yellow, though she did not explain why. And her father, Emmanuel, held a camera he did not entirely know how to operate and took 17 photographs of the back of a stranger's head before Patricia gently redirected him. It was May 2010. Renata was 22 years old, and she had a plan. The plan was simple, in the way that plans made by people who genuinely love something are always simple. She was going to go back to Charlotte and teach children how to read. Not because it was a stable job, not because the benefits were good, not because it was the practical thing to do with an education degree, though all of those things were true. She was going to do it because she believed, with the specific and unshakable conviction of someone who had thought it all the way through, that a child who learned to read fluently was a child whose entire life had been quietly rearranged in their favor. She had believed this since the third grade herself, when a teacher named Mrs. Aldridge had sat with her for 30 extra minutes every Tuesday afternoon and helped her through a chapter book about a girl who solved mysteries in her neighborhood. Renata had not been a struggling reader. She had been a competent one. Mrs. Aldridge had seen something beyond competent and had reached for it anyway. Renata never forgot that. She drove back to Charlotte in a 2004 Honda Civic with 118,000 miles on it and a passenger seat full of textbooks she had not returned to the campus library because she intended to keep using them. She moved back into her parents' house on Tyvola Road temporarily, the same house she had grown up in after the family settled permanently in Charlotte, the one with the oak tree in the backyard that her father had hung a swing from and never taken down even after she was too old for it. She applied to 14 schools in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District. She accepted a position at Druid Hills Academy. Druid Hills Academy sat on a street in West Charlotte that did not appear in travel guides or city brochures. It was a long, flat-roofed building the color of old cream, surrounded by a chain-link fence and a parking lot where teachers arrived early and left late and sometimes sat in their cars for a few extra minutes before going in because teaching was the most important work in the world and also the most relentlessly demanding. More than 85% of the students at Druid Hills qualified for free or reduced lunch. That number sounds like a statistic until you understand what it means in a third-grade classroom. It means that a significant portion of the children sitting on that reading rug had not eaten a full breakfast. It means some of them had been awake since 5 a.m. because the apartment was small and the walls were thin. It means some of them were carrying things in their small bodies that no 8-year-old should have to carry, and they were being asked to sit still and learn phonics. Renata understood this before she walked in on her first day. She had studied it. She had prepared for it in every academic way a person could prepare. The textbooks had explained the challenges with charts and research citations and carefully worded policy language. What the textbooks had not prepared her for was Malik. Malik was in her first third-grade class. He was 8 years old, small for his age, and he wore the same pair of blue sneakers every day for the entire school year. He was not a difficult child. He was a quiet child, which is a different thing entirely, and which teachers sometimes confuse with each other. He sat in the second row, and he watched Renata, with the careful attention of someone checking to see whether this person was going to be like the others, whether she was going to stay. Renata saw that look and recognized it from the inside out, not because her own childhood had been unstable, but because she was the kind of person who could read the specific grammar of a child's silence. She stayed. She stayed for 14 years, in that building, in that neighborhood, in that city. While everything else changed, while Charlotte grew and stretched outward and new buildings went up downtown and the school district shuffled administrators and adjusted curricula and renamed things, Renata Osei stayed at Druid Hills Academy and taught 3rd grade. She arrived first every morning. She left last every evening. She kept a box of granola bars, peanut butter crackers, and apple juice boxes in the bottom drawer of her desk. Not on the desk, not visible, in the drawer, so that a child who needed something could ask quietly and without the particular shame that hunger carries when it is witnessed by everyone. She remembered every student's birthday, not with a sticky note reminder on her computer. From memory, she taped a handmade card to each child's desk before they arrived on their birthday morning. Not bought cards, handmade ones, with that child's name written in her large, clear handwriting and a drawing inside that was specific to that child. The girl who loved horses got a horse. The boy who was obsessed with dinosaurs got a dinosaur. The child who spent every recess looking at clouds got a drawing of a cloud with a small figure looking up at it from below. Her colleague Deanna Fitch, who taught 4th grade next door, worked alongside Renata for 6 years. She would later tell a Charlotte Observer reporter, "Renata taught reading like it was a miracle she was personally responsible for delivering." She genuinely believed, and I mean this, I watched her believe it every single day, that if a child learned to read fluently, it changed the architecture of their entire life. She said that once in the break room, and I wrote it down when I got home because I knew it was something I needed to keep. She met Jerome Whitfield in 2012. He came to Druid Hills Academy on a community outreach day. The Charlotte Fire Department sent crews to schools every year, and Jerome was on a truck out of Station 21 on Remount Road. He was 6 feet tall with a careful smile and the kind of unhurried manner that suggested a person who had thought seriously about what was worth rushing toward and had come up with a short list. He helped a group of 2nd graders climb on the fire truck. He let them wear his helmet. He answered their questions about fire with the patient, factual thoroughness of someone who respected children enough not to talk down to them. Renata watched him from across the parking lot and thought 2 things in sequence. He is very good with children, and I would like to know him better. She introduced herself. Jerome shook her hand and said he'd heard great things about her from his cousin's daughter, who had been in Renata's class 2 years earlier, and still talked about the birthday card with the drawing of the butterfly on it. She keeps it in her room, he said. Taped to the mirror. Renata looked at him for a moment. What's her name? She asked. Destiny Williams, he said. Renata's face changed in a small, specific way. The way a face changes when a name lands on a memory, and the memory is a warm one. She used to stay in at recess to help me reorganize the bookshelf, she said. She had a system. I still use the system. Jerome smiled then. The full version of the careful smile. The one that was clearly being kept for moments that deserved it. I know, he said. She told me that too. They had coffee the following Saturday at a place called Summit Coffee on North Tryon Street. They talked for 3 hours. Jerome had grown up in West Charlotte, graduated from West Charlotte High School in 2006, gone directly into the Fire Academy. He had a younger sister named Brianna, who he described as the actually smart one in the family, though the way he said it communicated only pride. He coached a youth flag football team on Saturdays at Marshall Park. He read crime novels. He made a chili that his entire Station 21 crew requested at every opportunity. Renata listened to all of this with the kind of attention she was known for. Real, unhurried. The attention that makes people feel that the space they are in is safe enough to fill with honest things. By the time the coffee was finished, Jerome knew about Mrs. Aldridge and the Tuesday afternoon reading sessions. He knew about the move from Columbus. He knew about NC State and the diploma that had kept catching under her heels. He did not know about Charlotte Christian School or a skinny boy with a perfect shooting form. That was not a story that needed to be told at a first coffee. It was not a wound or a secret. It was simply a chapter from a life that belonged entirely to Renata, the way all of our earlier chapters belong to us. Not hidden, just kept, in the specific interior pocket where we store the people who helped us become ourselves, before we knew who that was going to be. They were married, in August 2014, at New Life Baptist Church on West Boulevard. Emmanuel Osei walked his daughter down the aisle and cried in a way that surprised everyone who knew him as a composed man. Patricia Osei sat in the front row in a yellow dress and did not cry at all during the ceremony, which Renata understood perfectly. Her mother saved her tears for private moments and private reasons, which was exactly the kind of emotional precision Renata had inherited. Jerome wore a white jacket and looked at his bride with the expression of a man who understood exactly what was standing in front of him and intended to be worthy of it. They bought the yellow house on Redbud Lane the following spring. Imani came in 2016. She arrived into the world in the specific way that first children arrive, transforming everything all at once, rearranging all the priorities and all the furniture and all the future plans in a single moment, so that the people in the room can only stand there and understand, without words, that everything is different now, and that different is the right word for it. Renata held her daughter for the first time, and felt something happen that she would later describe only as recognition, as if she had been waiting for this person specifically, and now that she had arrived, a question she had not known she was asking had been answered. Jerome sat in the hospital chair next to Renata's bed and held his daughter's hand, her whole hand wrapped around one of his fingers, and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "We have to be really good at this." "We will be," Renata said. They were. Ezra came in 2018. He arrived with an opinion about everything and a laugh exactly like Renata's. Sudden, unannounced, completely honest. Jerome said the day Ezra was born was the day he understood what the word full actually meant. The four of them fit into the yellow house on Redbud Lane the way families fit into homes that are right for them. A little snugly, warmly, with the comfortable friction of people who know each other well enough to get on each other's nerves and love each other through it. Jerome coached his flag football kids on Saturdays and made his chili on Sundays, and fixed the neighbors' gutters without being asked, and lay on the living room floor with Imani and Ezra in the evenings making up stories about animals that solved problems. Always problems that could be solved through kindness rather than cleverness, because Jerome believed those were different skills, and only one of them was reliably useful. Renata taught her third graders. She read to them every day. She kept the drawer stocked. She remembered the birthdays. The light in the yellow house on Redbud Lane was on late most evenings, not from crisis or worry, just from life being full enough to stay awake for. It was a good life. It was genuinely, quietly, specifically good. On the night of October 14, 2021, Jerome Whitfield was on duty at Station 21 on Remount Road. A call came in at 11:47 p.m. A warehouse fire on Statesville Avenue in West Charlotte. Commercial structure, 2 stories, heavily involved. Jerome's truck was the second unit on scene. The details of what happened next live in official reports, and in the memories of the men who were there with him, and in the particular, permanent silence that occupies the space where Jerome Whitfield used to stand. What the reports record is that Jerome entered the structure to assist in the evacuation of a man who was trapped on the second floor. He reached the man. He was guiding him toward the exit when the roof in the northeast section of the building underwent a structural collapse. Jerome Whitfield was 34 years old. Imani was 5. Ezra was 3. The community came, the way communities come. Meals appeared on the porch every day for 6 weeks. The firefighter brotherhood showed up in the deep, practical, physical way that people show up when the loss is one of their own. Present, useful, careful not to say the wrong thing because they had learned what the wrong thing cost. Marcus Webb was at the door within 2 hours of the phone call. Emmanuel and Patricia drove from Tyvola Road and stayed for 2 weeks. Charlotte showed up for one of its own. And then, gradually, the way it always does, the acute emergency of other people's grief settled into its natural rhythm. The meal train ended. The calls became less frequent. People had their own lives and their own difficulties, and they had given everything they had to give in the acute phase, which was everything that could be asked of them. Renata did not blame anyone for this. She understood it completely. What nobody tells you, or what people tell you in language too general to be useful, is what grief feels like at midnight in a quiet house, when both children are asleep, and the coffee cup that is not yours is still in the cabinet because you have not decided yet what to do about the coffee cup. It feels like a question that has no answer, but that you cannot stop asking. It feels like being very awake in a world that has gone to sleep. Renata returned to Druid Hills Academy in the fall of 2022. She showed up on the first day in her teacher's cardigan, with the granola bars in the drawer, and the birthday list in her memory, and the reading lessons that she believed could change the architecture of a child's entire life. She showed up every single day, and in the evenings, after Imani and Ezra were fed and bathed and read to and tucked in, after the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, she went to the basement. She turned on the light, and she began. Her neighbor Gloria Tate was a retired postal worker who had lived next door to the Yellow House for 11 years, and who noticed things the way people notice things when they have spent a career paying attention to addresses and routes and the small daily signals of a neighborhood's life. Gloria noticed the basement light. Every night, she would later tell a Charlotte Observer reporter, "I'd see it on at midnight, 1 in the morning, sometimes 2. I worried about her. At first, I thought grief was eating her alive down there. Then, after a while, I stopped worrying. Because I started to understand that whatever she was doing in that basement, it was keeping her alive. The light wasn't the sign of a person falling apart. It was the sign of a person building something. What Renata was building in that basement, night after night, alone, in the quiet hours after her children slept, that is the next part of this story. And it begins with an empty notebook and a box of colored pencils bought from the Dollar General on Beatty's Ford Road. And it ends with Steph Curry sitting on a basement floor, crying, in a way he had not cried since he was a boy, on a JV bench in Charlotte, trying to become himself. The Dollar General on Beatty's Ford Road does not look like the beginning of anything. It sits in a strip of West Charlotte storefronts, between a hair salon and a cell phone repair shop, its red and yellow sign weathered at the corners, its parking lot a little uneven, its fluorescent interior lighting the particular shade of bright that makes everything inside look equally important. Dish soap and birthday candles and school supplies and canned goods, all sharing the same shelf-level urgency. Renata Osei Whitfield walked in on a Thursday evening in November 2021, 3 weeks and 2 days after Jerome's funeral, with Imani on her hip and Ezra holding the back pocket of her jeans, the way small children hold on when they are in an unfamiliar mood and need an anchor. She had come for paper towels. She left with paper towels, a box of 64 colored pencils, and 4 composition notebooks, the black and white marbled kind, wide-ruled, the same kind she had used in elementary school herself. She did not know why she bought the notebooks and pencils. She would think about this later and not have a clean explanation for it. The closest she could come was this. Her hands had reached for them before her mind had formed a reason, and she had learned, in the weeks since Jerome died, to trust her hands more than her mind when her mind was not yet reliable. She put the children to bed at 8:30. She went to the basement at 9. She sat at the small folding table Jerome had set up down there for his own projects. He had been in the middle of building a wooden toy chest for Ezra's room, and the tools were still laid out in his particular organized way, each one parallel to the next, the way he did everything. And she opened the first composition notebook to the first page. She picked up a pencil, burnt orange, from the box of 64. She wrote a title at the top of the page. The title was, "Where Did Daddy Go?" She stared at it for a long time. Then she started writing. What came out of Renata in those first nights was not polished or planned. It was the raw, unfiltered thing that lives underneath every parent's carefully managed answer to impossible questions. The real response to Mommy, "Where is Daddy now?" And, "Was Daddy know I lost my tooth?" And, "Can Daddy see me when I'm at school?" Imani had asked the first question 2 days after the funeral, at the breakfast table, over a bowl of cereal, in the matter-of-fact tone that 5-year-olds use for enormous questions because they do not yet have the framework to understand that the question is enormous. Renata had answered her. She had found the words in the moment because mothers find words when their children need them. That is one of the things mothers do, and Renata Osei-Whitfield was very good at it. But afterward, when Imani had finished her cereal and gone to find her shoes, Renata had sat at the kitchen table and thought, there should be a book for this. Not a book about death in the clinical, careful, tiptoeing way that many children's books approached it, with soft focus illustrations of clouds and careful language that told children feelings were okay without actually sitting inside the specific feelings with them. Not a book that resolved grief in 20 pages with a rainbow and a lesson. A book that was honest. A book that sat down next to a child in the specific darkness of missing their father and said, "I know, I see you. This is real, and it is heavy, and you are not wrong to feel the weight of it. And also, hear me, you are going to be okay, not because the weight goes away, because you are strong enough to carry it, and you did not build that strength alone. He built it in you before he left." She went to the Barnes & Noble on Pineville Matthews Road the week before she bought the composition notebooks. She stood in the children's section for 55 minutes. She read the backs of books and opened the pages of others. She was not looking for perfection. She was looking for something that came close to what she needed to hand her daughter. She could not find it. She drove home and sat in the driveway of the yellow house for a while. Then she went inside and looked at her children. She thought, if the book doesn't exist, you write it. This was the kind of thought Renata had. Plain, direct, without drama. She was not a person who romanticized her own impulses. She was a teacher. When a child needed a resource that didn't exist, you made the resource. That was the job, so she made the resource. The first book took her 11 nights. She wrote in longhand because typing felt too fast for what she was doing. The slowness of handwriting matched the slowness of grief, the careful pace of working through something sentence by sentence, word by word, in the way that you work through something real when you are not trying to get past it, but through it. The story was about a little girl named Nadia, who was 6 years old and whose father had been a firefighter. Nadia's father had big hands and a careful smile, and told stories about animals that solved problems through kindness. He made something called his famous chili that the people he worked with requested all the time. He lay on the living room floor with Nadia in the evenings and taught her that brave did not mean unafraid. It meant you were afraid and you went anyway. Then one night he went away. The book did not explain the going away with distance or clouds or angels, though it did not dismiss those ideas either, because Renata understood that faith was a private architecture, and she had no right to build it or dismantle it for anyone else's child. It explained the going away with honesty. Daddy went on a call and there was an accident, and Daddy did not come home. And that is the hardest sentence in the world, and it is true, and you are allowed to be angry that it is true. Nadia was angry. The book showed her being angry, really angry, in the specific physical way that small children express enormous emotions, with her fists at her sides, and her face scrunched, and her whole body tight with the unfairness of it. And then, slowly, across the rest of the pages, the book showed what Nadia found. She found that her father had left things behind, not objects. The book was careful about this, because Renata knew that objects broke and got lost and were insufficient containers for love. What Nadia's father had left behind were structural things. The way Nadia held her pencil, patient and deliberate, the way he held his. The way she laughed suddenly and completely, catching people off guard. The way she was kind without being asked. Because he had taught her through his own example that kindness was not a mood, it was a practice. The book ended with Nadia asking her mother the question she had been most afraid to ask all year. Does Daddy know we're okay? And Nadia's mother says, he knows. He's the one who made you okay. That's how he knows. Renata read the finished book to herself at the folding table in the basement at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. She read it the way she read to her third graders, aloud, all the way through, without stopping. When she finished, she sat for a moment in the basement quiet. Then she picked up the burnt orange pencil and opened the second composition notebook. She wrote a new title at the top of the first page. This one was called The List. It was about a little boy named Sam who kept a running list of things he wanted to tell his father. Funny things, small things, the daily accumulation of moments that a child naturally reaches for a parent to share. A joke he heard at school, a bird he saw that was a color he couldn't name, the way his little sister had tried to put shoes on the cat, and the cat's response to this development. The list kept growing, because the things worth telling never stopped happening, which was the point of the story, that the accumulation of life continuing, of things still being funny and strange and worth noting, was not a betrayal of grief. It was the proof that the person you lost had taught you to find the world worth paying attention to. Sam mails the list at the end. He addresses it to his father. He puts a stamp on it. His grandmother asks where he's mailing it. Sam says, somewhere he can read it. The grandmother holds him for a long time without saying anything, which was the right response, which Renata knew was the right response, because it was the response Jerome's own mother had given Ezra when Ezra had asked, at 3 years old, if Daddy was going to come to his birthday party. She had just held him. Sometimes holding was the most honest answer. By the fall of 2023, there were 11 composition notebooks in a plastic storage bin in the basement. 11 complete stories. 11 sets of colored pencil illustrations, simple and warm and specific, in the way that Renata's handmade birthday cards were specific. Drawn not for a general child, but for the particular interior landscape of a child trying to understand loss. The characters had different names, different families, different details. Some had lost mothers. Some had lost grandparents who had been their primary caregiver. One story was about a child whose parent was alive but absent in a different way, a way that also needed a name and a gentle, honest explanation. But all 11 stories shared a spine of belief, that love does not end with the person, that what someone builds in you while they are alive continues to operate after they are gone, that grief and love are not opposites, they are the same motion, in different directions, and you can hold both of them without one canceling the other out. Renata showed the notebooks to her mother Patricia first. Patricia sat at the kitchen table on Tivola Road on a Sunday afternoon, and read all 11 from beginning to end without speaking. When she finished, she looked at her daughter across the table. "Baby," she said, "these need to be in the world." Renata smiled in the way she smiled when she agreed with something but was not ready to do anything about it yet. "Therefore Imani and Ezra," she said, "that's enough. Patricia looked at her daughter for a long moment with the specific look that mothers deploy when they have something important to say and are deciding whether now is the time. She decided. "No," Patricia said, very gently, but very clearly. "It is not enough. There are other Nadias and other Sams in this world, in this city, sitting in classrooms right now, tonight, with questions nobody is answering honestly. You know there are. You teach them." Renata was quiet. She knew her mother was right. She had known it for a while, in the back of her mind where you keep the things you're not quite ready to act on. She contacted 2 literary agents in early 2023. She sent careful, well-written query letters with photographs of the notebook pages attached. The first agent replied in 3 weeks with a kind, brief email that said the market for children's grief books was difficult, and that while the writing showed genuine feeling, the handwritten format made representation challenging at this time. The second agent did not reply at all. Renata put the bin in the corner of the basement and covered it with an old bedsheet, one of Jerome's old station shirts, soft gray cotton, that she had been unable to put in the donation bag and had found another use for instead. She kept going to the basement. She started a 12th notebook. Marcus Webb had known Renata Ose since the 3 of them, Steph, Marcus, Renata, had shared a lunch table at Charlotte Christian in 2002. He had stayed in Charlotte too, after college. Had become a social worker in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, which meant he spent his days in the same kinds of buildings Renata spent hers, advocating for the same kinds of children, navigating the same exhausting and necessary machinery of a public system, trying to serve kids that the system was not always designed to serve. When Jerome died, Marcus was one of the first people at the door. He came back the following week, and the week after that, he brought groceries and sat with Imani and Ezra while Renata was on the phone with the insurance company, because those were the calls that nobody tells you about, the administrative machinery of loss, the forms and the accounts, and the endless practical requirements of a life that has to keep running even when the person who helped run it is gone. Marcus was, in the truest sense, a good friend. He visited Renata on a Saturday in January 2024. Ezra showed him a drawing he had made of a dinosaur. Imani beat him at a card game and was not gracious about it. They had coffee at the kitchen table and talked about work and the children and the small news of Charlotte. Then Renata looked at him with the direct, level attention that meant she had decided to show him something. She took him to the basement. She lifted the old gray station shirt off the plastic bin. She handed him the first notebook. Marcus read it standing up, at the folding table where Renata had written all 11 of them, under the single overhead bulb that was the only light in the basement. He read it the way people read things when they understand on the first page that what they are holding matters, without looking up, without pausing, taking it in completely. When he finished, he reached for the second one. He read all 11. He stood in that basement for a long time after he finished, looking at the bin, understanding what he was looking at in the way you understand something when you are standing close enough to it to feel its weight. He drove home. He sat in his car in his driveway, on a street in South Charlotte, on a January evening, with the engine off and the windows fogging slightly from the cold. He thought about what he had just read. He thought about who needed to know about it. He thought about a phone call he had never planned to make, had, in 22 years of friendship, made a point not to make, because that was the kind of friendship it was, one built on the understanding that Steph's fame was not a resource Marcus would ever reach for. He took out his phone. He found the contact. He pressed call. Steph answered on the third ring. "Marcus," he said, with the easy recognition of someone genuinely glad to hear a familiar voice. Marcus took one breath. "Steph," he said, "I need to tell you something about Renata Ose. And I need you to sit down first." There was a brief pause. "I'm sitting," Steph said. And Marcus Webb told him everything. He talked for 11 minutes. He described the yellow house and the folding table and the old gray station shirt covering the bin. He described Jerome, not the accident, Steph could look that up, but Jerome as Renata had shown him in the pages of those notebooks without ever using his name. The big hands and the careful smile, and the flag football kids, and the famous chili, and the stories about animals that solved problems through kindness. He described all 11 books. Not summarized, described, the way someone describes something when they want the person on the other end of the phone to understand not just what it is, but what it means. He described Nadia and Sam, and the burnt orange-colored pencil, and the Dollar General on Beatty's Ford Road, and the 2 rejection emails, and the bedsheet covering the bin. He described what it felt like to stand in that basement and hold 11 composition notebooks written by a woman at midnight, alone, after her children were asleep, who had looked for something to give them that did not exist and had made it herself. When Marcus finished talking, the phone was quiet for long enough that he checked to make sure the call was still connected. It was. Then Steph said 2 words, very quietly. "Send me the address." He hung up and sat for a moment. Then he texted his assistant the message that would become, in the small internal mythology of the people who knew this story, the moment everything changed. "Clear the week. I need to go to Charlotte." His assistant, a woman named Brianna Cole who had worked with Steph for 7 years, and who had, over those 7 years, organized championship celebrations and international appearances, and a schedule that operated at the velocity of one of the most famous people on Earth, replied with a message that contained 3 words, "Already on it." Steph Curry landed in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. He rented a gray Toyota Camry from the airport because he did not want a car service, did not want a driver, did not want anything that would make this feel official, or managed, or like something that was being done correctly, according to someone else's protocol. He stopped at a grocery store on the way. His mother Sonia had taught him, and his brother Seth, that you did not show up at someone's home empty-handed. It was a rule she had instilled, not as etiquette, but as a form of respect, an acknowledgement that you were entering someone else's world, and that their world deserved something brought to it. He bought bread and soup and a container of fresh fruit and a small bunch of yellow tulips. He held the tulips in the grocery store for a moment, in the flower section near the entrance, and thought about a yellow headband on a girl in bleachers more than 20 years ago. He put them in the cart. He drove to Redbud Lane. He parked in front of a small yellow house with a concrete porch and a basketball hoop in the driveway, with a slightly bent rim. He sat in the car for 3 minutes. He got out. He walked up the porch steps with the brown paper bag and the yellow tulips, and 15 years of silence. And before he could knock, the door opened, and Renata Osei Whitfield stood in the doorway in her teacher's cardigan, looking at him the way people look at someone they knew before the world got hold of them. And she said, "You still can't dress yourself, Wardell." And Steph Curry laughed, and 15 years dissolved like they had never been anything but a pause between 2 sentences in the same conversation. The porch of the yellow house on Redbud Lane was not a large porch. It had 2 concrete steps, a black metal railing that Jerome had repainted the summer before he died, and 2 plastic chairs, one green, one blue, that Renata had bought from a hardware store sale 3 years ago, and that had sat in the same positions ever since, angled slightly toward each other, the way chairs angle when a house has learned that 2 people sitting on a porch is one of its regular conditions. Steph set the grocery bag down between the chairs. He held out the yellow tulips. Renata looked at them for a moment. Something moved across her face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, the specific look of someone who has just been shown that they were remembered in a way they did not know they had been remembered. She took the tulips without a word and held them at her side with the easy, unself-conscious grip of a person who was not going to make a production of being moved. "Sit down," she said. "I'll put these in water and get coffee." "You don't have to." Steph. She looked at him with the calm, level patience she used with third graders who were about to argue against something that was already decided. Sit down. He sat in the blue chair. She went inside. He looked at the street. Redbud Lane in March was the kind of quiet that West Charlotte neighborhoods have on weekday mornings. A settled, residential quiet. Not empty, but resting. 2 houses down, an older man was walking a dog that moved with the dignified slowness of advanced age. Across the street, a woman was reversing a minivan out of a driveway with the particular careful precision of someone who had backed into something once and was not going to do it again. Steph looked at the basketball hoop. It was a standard driveway hoop, the adjustable kind, weighted base, 10 feet regulation height. The net was newer than the rim, which meant someone had replaced the net at some point, but had not gotten around to bending the rim back to its correct angle, or had decided not to, or had not noticed, or had noticed and decided that a slightly bent rim was not the most important thing. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Jerome Whitfield, a man he had never met, who had put that hoop in that driveway for his children and had never come home to see whether they used it. Renata came back with 2 mugs of coffee and the yellow tulips in a mason jar, which she set on the porch railing. She sat in the green chair and handed him his mug and looked at the street the way people look at things when they are gathering themselves for a conversation that matters. Black, she said, nodding at the coffee. I don't remember if that's how you take it. It's how I take it, he said. Good guess then. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. Or Marcus told you. Marcus didn't tell me, Steph said. She nodded. A small smile. They sat for a moment in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had once known how to be quiet together, and found that the skill had not entirely left them. How are Imani and Ezra? Steph asked. Renata's face did the specific thing it did when her children were mentioned. A softening, immediate and total, the way a room softens when someone turns on a warmer light. Imani is at school, she said. She's 7 now. She has opinions about everything, and she's usually right, which is both wonderful and exhausting. Ezra is at my neighbor Gloria's house. He's 5. He talks constantly, complete sentences since he was 2.5, and he has not stopped since. They sound like you, Steph said. Imani sounds like me, Renata said. Ezra sounds like… She stopped. She took a sip of coffee. Ezra sounds like Jerome, she said, in the steady, practiced tone of someone who has learned to say their person's name out loud without it breaking them every time, even though it still costs something each time. He makes the same face Jerome used to make when something was funny, but he was trying not to laugh. I see it about 15 times a day. Is that hard? Steph asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. It's the opposite of hard, she said. It's the best part of every day. Steph nodded. He looked at his coffee. I'm sorry about Jerome, he said. I know it doesn't. It does, Renata said simply. It always does. Don't qualify it. He looked at her. Okay, he said. I'm sorry about Jerome. Thank you, she said. She said it directly, without deflection, the way she received everything, straight on, with both hands, not trying to make it smaller or easier than it was. They sat on the porch for another 40 minutes. They talked the way people talk when they have a significant amount of shared history and a significant gap in the middle, and are finding their way back to each other's conversational rhythm, testing sentences, finding that they still landed the way they used to, gaining confidence in the exchange. Steph told her about the Warriors season. She told him she didn't watch much basketball anymore, and said it without apology, which made him laugh. He told her about Riley, now 10 years old, and already showing the specific confidence of a child who has grown up in a household where being yourself is the standard. He told her about Ryan, 9, and Cannon, 7. She listened with genuine interest, the kind that had no performance in it. She told him about Druid Hills Academy, about Deanna next door, and the reading program they had built together, and the third grader named Jalen, who had come in unable to read a single word in September, and had stood up in November and read a full paragraph to the class, and then looked at Renata with an expression she described as, "The reason I do this," put directly on a child's face. Steph listened, all the way through, without waiting for a pause to insert himself. This was something Renata noticed and did not comment on. Some things you just note quietly and file. After a while, the conversation found its way to the place it had always been heading. "Marcus told you about the basement," Renata said. "He did," Steph said. The street was quiet. A bird somewhere in the oak tree at the edge of the yard was conducting an argument with the morning that it seemed to feel strongly about. "Do you want to see it?" she asked. He looked at her. "Only if you want to show me," he said. There was a pause. Not a hesitant one, a considered one. Renata did not do anything without considering it. "I want to show you," she said. "I've wanted to show someone who would understand it." Marcus understood part of it. My mother understood another part. But there's a part that… She stopped. She looked at her coffee. There's a part that requires someone who knows what it costs to do a thing in the dark, for a long time before anyone sees it, before anyone tells you it's real. She looked at him. "You know what that costs," she said. "You did it at Davidson. You did it for years when nobody believed you were good enough." Steph was quiet for a moment. "I know what that costs," he said. She stood up. "Come inside," she said. The inside of the yellow house was warm and specific, in the way that only homes with children in them are specific. An accumulated, living specificity that no interior designer could replicate because it was not designed. It was lived. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up by magnets shaped like fruits. There was a height chart penciled directly onto the doorframe of the hallway. Jerome's name written in his own handwriting at the top, with dates going back to 2017. Imani, age 129 inches. The record of a father measuring his children against a doorframe the way fathers do when they are building a private archive of time. The measurements stopped at October 2021. Renata had continued them in her own handwriting below. Different pen, same doorframe. Steph saw this as he walked through the hallway and did not say anything about it. Some things you just note quietly and file. There was a cereal bowl in the drying rack. There were small shoes by the front door. One pair of pink sneakers and one pair of dinosaur print boots. Toes pointing slightly inward, the way children's shoes point when they have been kicked off in a hurry. There was a crayon drawing taped to the wall at child eye level that appeared to depict either a very large dog or a small horse, and beneath it, in a child's handwriting, "This is Ezra's dragon." Renata walked him through the kitchen and to a door off the back hallway. She put her hand on the doorknob. She paused, not from uncertainty, but from the particular breath that people take before they show someone something real. She opened the door. The stairs going down were wooden, slightly creaky. Lit by the light she reached past him to switch on. A single overhead bulb that threw a warm yellow light over a low-ceilinged basement room. The room was not large. It had a concrete floor with a braided rug in the center. Along one wall were Jerome's tools, still laid out on a workbench in his organized parallel lines, dust-covered now but undisturbed. Against the opposite wall was the wooden toy chest he had been building for Ezra, half-finished, the wood still pale and unvarnished, frozen at the exact stage of completion it had been at on October 13, 2021. In the center of the room was the folding table. On the table, a mason jar holding a collection of colored pencils worn down to different lengths. A dictionary, its spine cracked from use. A small lamp with a warm bulb. A glass of water. A single composition notebook, open, mid-sentence. The burnt orange pencil resting in the crease of the open pages. And in the corner, on a low shelf, covered with a soft gray fabric that Steph now understood was a fire station shirt. a plastic storage bin. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and took the room in. He looked at the tools on the wall. He looked at the unfinished toy chest. He looked at the folding table with its mason jar of worn-down pencils, and the open notebook mid-sentence, and the small warm lamp that had been on every night at midnight for 2.5 years, while the rest of the house slept. He understood what kind of room this was. It was the kind of room where a person goes to survive. Renata crossed to the corner shelf. She lifted the gray station shirt carefully, folded it over her arm. She looked at the bin for a moment. Then she looked at Steph. 11, she said. There are 11 of them. She lifted the lid. Inside the bin, arranged in order, were 11 composition notebooks. Each one had a label on the front cover. A title, written in Renata's clear handwriting, with a small colored pencil illustration beside each title. A girl with braids, a boy with a list, a grandmother's hands, a dog sitting by an empty chair. Steph looked at them. He did not pick them up immediately. He stood in front of the bin and looked at 11 composition notebooks in a plastic bin in a Charlotte basement, and took the full measure of what he was looking at. He thought about the folding table, the midnight light, the Dollar General pencils worn to different lengths, the 2 rejection emails, the gray station shirt used as a cover. He thought about 11 nights becoming 11 notebooks, and a 12th one open on the table mid-sentence, because the love that was generating all of this had not finished yet. He reached in. He picked up the first notebook. He read the title on the cover. Where Did Daddy Go? He opened it. He read Standing Up. Renata sat on the bottom step of the basement stairs and watched him. She had shown the notebooks to 3 people in 2.5 years. Each time, she had watched the reader's face the way she watched her third graders' faces when she read to them. Not for approval, but for the specific signal that told her whether something true was landing. With Marcus, the signal had been stillness. He had gone very still halfway through the first notebook and stayed that way. With her mother Patricia, the signal had been tears, immediate, continuous, entirely silent. With Steph Curry, the signal was something she had not expected. He smiled first. He smiled at something on page 4, a small moment where Nadia's father makes a face across the room that makes her laugh even though she is trying to be serious. And it was the real smile, the one that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth, the same smile she had last seen on a 14-year-old boy on a JV bench in Charlotte. Then, by page 9, the smile had changed into something else. By page 12, he was crying. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. His shoulders did not shake. He did not make a sound. His eyes simply became full, and then the fullness spilled. The way a glass becomes full when you keep adding to it past the point of holding. And he kept reading with tears on his face, the way people continue doing what they're doing when they have decided the doing is more important than the stopping. He reached the last page. He read the final line. He knows. He's the one who made you okay. That's how he knows. He stood completely still for a moment. Then he sat down on the basement floor, not on the folding chair beside the table, not on a step. On the concrete floor, between the braided rug and the storage bin, with the notebook in his hands, in the way that people sit down when their legs have quietly made a decision without consulting them. Renata watched him from the bottom step. She did not say anything. He reached into the bin and picked up the second notebook. He read it on the floor, then the third, then the fourth. The basement was quiet, except for the slight sound of pages turning and, once, a sharp intake of breath from Steph when he reached a specific page in the fourth notebook. A story about a little boy who sets an extra place at the table on his birthday without being asked. And when his mother gently asks about it, the boy says simply, "That's his seat. He'll want to see me blow out the candles." Renata knew exactly which page it was without looking. It was the page she had cried through herself, writing it. Steph looked up at her. His face was open in the way that faces are open when all the usual management of expression has been set aside, because there is no point to it anymore, because what is being felt is too straightforward for management. "Renata," he said. "I know," she said, before he could continue. "No," he said. "You don't know what I'm going to say." She looked at him. "These are not just notebooks," he said. "You know they're not. They're for Imani and Ezra," she said. The same thing she had said to her mother, automatic, the prepared response she had been giving this observation for 2 years. "They are for Imani and Ezra," Steph said. "And they are for every Imani and every Ezra, in every city in this country, sitting in a classroom right now, with a question that nobody is answering honestly." The basement was very quiet. Renata looked at the bin. At the 11 notebooks, at the 12th one on the table, open, mid-sentence. "2 agents passed," she said. "2 agents were wrong," Steph said. He looked at the notebook in his hands. He looked at the worn-down colored pencils in the mason jar. He looked at the small, warm lamp and the open dictionary with its cracked spine, and the unfinished toy chest against the wall with its pale, unvarnished wood. He looked at Renata. "Are you okay if I make a phone call?" he asked. "Steph." "Just one," he said. "I need you to trust me for one phone call." She looked at him for a long moment. The same level, direct, complete attention she had given him on a set of bleachers 22 years ago, when he had told her that being someone's son, instead of himself, was exhausting every single day. "Okay," she said. He took out his phone. He dialed. The person on the other end picked up on the second ring. "Hey," Steph said. "I need 5 minutes. And I need you to listen to something." He held the phone out toward the bin, toward the 11 notebooks in their plastic container under the single warm bulb in a Charlotte basement, as if the phone could hear what was in them, just from proximity. Then he pulled it back. "Actually," he said into the phone, "let me just read you 1 page." He opened the first notebook. He read the last page. He knows. He's the one who made you okay. That's how he knows. The basement was quiet. Then the voice on the phone said something. Steph listened. He looked at Renata. "She says yes," he said. Renata looked at him. "Who says yes to what?" Steph was already dialing a second number. "One more call," he said. "I promise. Just one more." And downstairs in a yellow house on Redbud Lane in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Tuesday morning in March 2024, with a slightly bent basketball hoop in the driveway and 11 composition notebooks in a plastic bin and a 12th one open on a table mid-sentence. The next chapter of a story that began in a Dollar General and a set of school bleachers 22 years apart began, quietly, to write itself. The second call Steph made from that basement lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He knew this because he looked at his phone afterward, the way people check small details when they are trying to make something feel real, when the thing that just happened is large enough that the ordinary facts around it become anchors, something to hold while the larger thing settles. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. In that time, the direction of 11 composition notebooks changed entirely. The person on the other end of the second call was a woman named Dana Patel. She was a literary attorney based in New York City, who had worked with Steph's team on several projects over the years. Not a publicist, not an agent, but a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property and publishing rights, and who had, in Dana's own words, seen enough good ideas get buried by bad timing to know the difference between the two. Steph did not give her a long explanation. He told her there were 11 handwritten, illustrated children's books in a plastic bin in a Charlotte basement, written by a third-grade teacher and widow named Renata Osei Whitfield, that had been rejected twice by agents who had made a mistake. He told her what the books were about. He read her 1 paragraph from the first one. Not the last page this time, but the middle. The part where Nadia first tries to explain to her best friend at school what it means that her father is gone, and finds that the words she needs do not exist yet. So she sits in silence. And the best friend sits with her in the silence without trying to fill it, because sometimes that is the most loving thing a person can do. Dana Patel was quiet for a moment after he finished reading. Then she said, "Get me photographs of every page. Tonight, if possible." "Tonight," Steph confirmed. He hung up. He looked at Renata. "She's a literary attorney," he said. "One of the best. She's going to look at everything and tell us what we have." Renata was standing with her arms loosely crossed, the way she stood when she was processing something, not defensively but thoughtfully, giving herself the physical structure to think inside. "Us," she said. "What?" "You said tell us what we have." Steph paused. I know what you meant," Renata said, not unkindly, with the directness that was simply how she operated. "I'm not a project, Steph. These books are mine. They came from something mine. I need to know that you understand that before anything else happens." The basement was very quiet. Steph looked at her across the folding table and the mason jar of worn-down pencils and the open 12th notebook, and understood that this was not a moment to be managed or navigated. It was a moment to be honest in. "I understand that," he said. "These are yours, completely. Everything that happens from here is your decision. I'm not here to take anything. I'm here because Marcus called me and I came, and I read what you wrote, and I'm not able to leave this basement and pretend I didn't read it. That's all this is." Renata looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" he said. "Okay," she said again, with the finality of someone who had asked the question that needed asking and received the answer that needed receiving, and was ready to move forward. "Let's take the photographs." They spent the next 2 hours at the folding table with Steph's phone and the overhead lamp, and all 11 notebooks spread open page by page. Renata turned the pages. Steph photographed them. Neither of them spoke much during this process. It had the focused, practical quality of two people who have always been able to work alongside each other without filling the silence unnecessarily. Steph looked at every page as he photographed it. All 187 pages across 11 notebooks. The handwriting that was sometimes careful and sometimes hurried, depending on the hour and the intensity of what was being written, but always clear, always legible, always precise, in the places where precision mattered. The colored pencil illustrations that were simple the way children's illustrations should be simple, not because the artist lacked sophistication, but because she understood that a child needed to be able to find themselves in a drawing, and you cannot find yourself in something too complicated to hold. He saw things in the illustrations that he had not noticed reading quickly on the floor. Nadia, in the first book, wore a yellow headband. He looked at this for a moment. Renata was looking at the page too. Neither of them said anything about it. Some things you just note quietly and file. When they finished photographing all 11 notebooks, Steph sent the images to Dana Patel in 4 batches. Dana confirmed receipt within minutes, with a single text. "Reading tonight. Talk tomorrow." Renata made 2 more cups of coffee. They went back to the porch, the blue chair and the green chair, the yellow tulips in the mason jar on the railing, the March afternoon having warmed into something that felt genuinely like the beginning of spring, rather than just the rumor of it. Imani came home from school at 3:15. She came through the front gate, with the particular energy of a 7-year-old, at the end of a school day. Backpack half hanging off one shoulder, ponytail slightly undone. Something she needed to tell her mother, already forming on her face, before the gate had swung closed behind her. She saw Steph in the blue chair. She stopped. She looked at her mother. "Mom," she said, in the careful tone of a child who recognizes a face and is doing rapid calculations about the correct response to this situation. Is that. This is my friend Steph," Renata said. "We went to school together a long time ago." Imani looked at Steph with the frank, unfiltered assessment that 7-year-olds deploy without apology. "You play basketball," she said. I do, Steph said. My daddy put up a hoop, she said, gesturing toward the driveway with her backpack still hanging off her shoulder. The rim is bent. I keep telling Mom we should fix it. I noticed the rim, Steph said. It still goes in if you adjust, Imani said, with the pragmatic confidence of someone who had worked out the geometry. You just have to know where to aim. Steph looked at this 7-year-old girl with her half-undone ponytail and her absolute certainty, and her father's basketball hoop in the driveway, and her mother's direct, level eyes. That, he said, is very good advice. Imani considered him for another moment. Then she apparently decided he had passed some internal evaluation, because she went inside with the decisive efficiency of a child who had things to do, letting the screen door swing closed behind her. Renata was smiling. She's terrifying, Steph said. She really is, Renata agreed. Dana Patel called at 7:15 the following morning. Renata was at the kitchen table with her first cup of coffee. Ezra was eating cereal and providing a running commentary on the cereal's taste that suggested he was having strong feelings about it. And Steph was at a hotel in uptown Charlotte, the Kimpton Tryon Park on Tryon Street, which he had chosen specifically because it was not the kind of hotel that generated attention. Dana called Steph first. He called Renata immediately after. She read them all, he said. All 11? Renata said. All 11. Twice, she said. He paused. Renata, she wants to submit to Scholastic. The kitchen was quiet, except for Ezra explaining to his cereal that it was not as good as yesterday's cereal, and that this was unacceptable. Scholastic, Renata said. Their children's division. She has a contact there, an editorial director named Carol Simmons, who has been specifically looking for grief resources for the 5 to 9 age range. Dana said, and I'm quoting her exactly, that these notebooks are the most honest thing she has read in the children's grief space in 20 years of working in publishing. Renata set her coffee cup down. She looked at Ezra, who had moved on from criticizing his cereal and was now building a small tower out of his remaining Cheerios with architectural seriousness. Dana also said, Steph continued, more carefully, that the handwritten format, the thing the agent said was a problem, she thinks it's actually the point. She thinks it should be preserved in the published version, reproduced exactly as you wrote it, your handwriting, your illustrations. She says it gives the book something that designed and typeset children's books can't replicate. She used the word testimony. Like the books are evidence of someone actually living through the thing they're writing about. Renata was quiet for a long time. Outside, through the kitchen window, she could see the basketball hoop in the driveway, the slightly bent rim. The new net Jerome had never seen go up, because she had replaced it herself the spring after he died. On a Saturday morning, while the children were at her parents' house, standing on a step stool in the driveway, threading the new white net through the rim loops with the patient, deliberate care of someone completing something that needed completing. Testimony, she said. That's her word, Steph said. I think she's right. Another pause. Can I think about it? Renata asked. Of course, Steph said immediately. I don't mean for a long time. I mean for today. Take whatever you need. She thought about it for the rest of the morning. She dropped Ezra at Gloria's. She drove to Druid Hills Academy. She taught her third graders the morning reading block, a math lesson, a science activity about plants that involved a significant amount of soil ending up in places that soil was not intended to be. At lunch, she sat at her desk and ate a sandwich, and looked at the bottom drawer where the granola bars and crackers and juice boxes lived. She thought about the children in her class who came in carrying things too heavy for their small bodies. She thought about Nadia and Sam and all the other children she had written in those composition notebooks, the fictional ones, assembled from fragments of real children she had watched, taught, held space for over 14 years of third-grade mornings. She thought about Imani asking, at the breakfast table over cereal, Mommy, where is Daddy now? She thought about the answer she had given. The answer she had then gone home and written into a book, because the answer deserved more than a moment. It deserved pages, and time, and the kind of careful love that only gets produced in the specific hours after midnight, when the house is quiet and your hands need somewhere to go. She picked up her phone. She called Steph. "Yes," she said when he answered. "Tell Dana yes." What happened over the 6 weeks following that phone call is the kind of sequence that sounds like it belongs in a different kind of story. A faster, more cinematic story, with a montage and a soundtrack, and the clean, satisfying arc of a thing coming together the way things only come together in movies. But this is not that kind of story. This is the kind where things come together because people did the work, and the work was real, and it took the time it took. Dana Patel submitted a formal proposal package to Scholastic's Children's Division on March 28, 2024. The package included photographs of all 11 notebooks, a cover letter that Dana later described as the easiest cover letter I have ever written, because the material did everything, and a brief biography of Renata Osei Whitfield that was factual and plain and more affecting for its plainness. Third-grade teacher. 14 years at a Title I school in Charlotte, widow, mother of 2, wrote 11 children's books by hand at midnight in her basement, because she could not find the book her children needed, and so she made it herself. Carol Simmons at Scholastic read the package on a Friday afternoon. She called Dana on Monday morning. Scholastic offered a publishing deal for a 6-book series on April 11, 2024. Exactly 4 weeks after Steph Curry had sat down on the basement floor of a yellow house on Redbud Lane and cried over a composition notebook written in burnt orange-colored pencil. The series would be published under the title, What Love Looks Like After. 6 books from the original 11, selected by Renata and Carol Simmons, together over 3 weeks of phone calls that Renata took in the evenings after the children were in bed, sitting at the same folding table in the same basement, under the same warm lamp, except now the plastic bin was open rather than covered, and the gray station shirt was folded neatly on the workbench beside Jerome's tools. The books would be reproduced exactly as written. Renata's handwriting, Renata's colored pencil illustrations, every page a facsimile of the original notebooks. Carol Simmons had used the same word Dana had used independently, which Renata took as a sign, testimony. The author would be listed as Renata Osei Whitfield. The dedication in the first book, Where Did Daddy Go?, would read, For Imani and Ezra. Your father knew how to love, and you are the proof. Renata wrote this dedication at the folding table on a Tuesday night in late April, in the same burnt orange pencil, on a fresh page. She wrote it once. She did not revise it. Some sentences arrive already finished. Steph's foreword for the first book was submitted to Scholastic in June 2024. It was 2 pages long. He wrote it himself. Not with a ghostwriter, not with editorial assistance, just Steph at a desk in his own handwriting, transferred to type, which felt right, given the nature of the project. He wrote about what it meant to grow up in Charlotte before anyone was watching. He wrote about Davidson College, and the years of being told he was too small, too slight, not enough of the things that the people doing the evaluating had decided mattered. He wrote about what it costs to do something in the dark for a long time before the light finds it, and how that cost is real, and how it is also, in some way he could not entirely explain, the thing that makes what you build worth building, because you built it for the right reasons, because there was no other reason available. He mentioned Charlotte Christian School, without naming it. He mentioned a JV basketball game and a set of bleachers, and a girl with a handwritten sign, and a laugh that came out like a door swinging open. He did not name her. She had asked him not to. Let the books be the story, she had said. Not me, not us. The books. He had agreed. Because she was right. Because she was almost always right about the things that mattered, which was something he had understood at 14 and found to be just as true at 36. The foreword ended with a sentence that the Scholastic editorial team initially flagged as possibly too simple for a foreword. Too plain, too short, not enough literary scaffolding around it. Steph told them to leave it exactly as written. The sentence was, "Sometimes the most important thing in the world is sitting in a plastic bin in someone's basement, waiting for the right person to lift the lid." They left it exactly as written. Renata told Imani and Ezra about the books on a Sunday morning in May 2024. She sat them both down at the kitchen table. Imani in her chair, Ezra in his, the same chairs they had always sat in, with the fruit magnets on the refrigerator and the height chart on the door frame and the morning light coming through the kitchen window, at the angle that meant it was between 9 and 10, the particular slant of it that Renata had memorized without trying to. She put the first notebook on the table between them. "You've seen Mommy go to the basement at night," she said. "Every night," Imani said, with the comprehensive accuracy of a child who had been tracking this. "Every night," Renata confirmed. I was writing stories. And the stories are going to be made into real books. The kind you can hold and buy in a store and find in a library." Ezra picked up the notebook. He held it with both hands the way he held things that he understood were important. He looked at the cover illustration. Nadia, with her braids and her yellow headband. "That's a girl," he said. "That's Nadia," Renata said. "Is she real?" he asked. Renata looked at her son, Jerome's laugh, Jerome's face when something was funny, Jerome's eyes looking at her across the kitchen table, from a small body that was 5 years old, and building itself into a person every single day. "She's as real as you need her to be," Renata said. Ezra considered this answer with the seriousness it deserved. Then he opened the notebook to the first page, and looked at the words he could not yet fully read, and the colored pencil illustrations he could fully understand. He turned to his mother. "Read it to us," he said. She did, all the way through. At the kitchen table on a Sunday morning in May, with the fruit magnets on the refrigerator and the light coming in at the 9 to 10 o'clock angle, Renata Osei Whitfield read to her children the story she had written for them in the dark, and they listened in the complete and trusting way that children listen when they know they are being given something true. When she read the last line, "He knows. He's the one who made you okay. That's how he knows." Imani was very still for a moment. Then she said, "That's about Daddy." "Yes," Renata said. "Does he really know?" Imani asked. 7 years old, sitting in her kitchen chair, asking the question she had carried for 2.5 years with the plain, brave directness of a child who had decided she was old enough for the real answer. Renata looked at her daughter. "He knows," she said. "He made you strong enough to be okay, and every time you're okay, that's him knowing." Imani sat with this. Then she slid off her chair, walked around the table, and climbed into her mother's lap. Too big for it, really, in the way that 7-year-olds are too big for laps, but do it anyway, because laps are not actually about size. And put her head against Renata's shoulder. Ezra, not to be excluded from whatever this was, climbed out of his chair and wedged himself in from the other side. Renata held both of them at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning. Outside, the basketball hoop with the slightly bent rim stood in the driveway in the May sunshine. The net moved in the small, soft wind. The What Love Looks Like After series arrived in bookstores on September 9, 2024. Not with a parade, not with a launch event at a big Manhattan venue with photographers and a guest list, and the particular performance of importance that publishing sometimes wraps around its releases. Renata had been offered those things and had declined them with the same quiet directness she brought to everything. Not out of false modesty, but out of a genuine understanding that the books did not need that kind of introduction. They were not books that needed to be sold. They were books that needed to be found. Those were different things, and they required different conditions. What Scholastic did instead, at Renata's suggestion, was send advance copies to school counselors, not reviewers, not celebrity book clubs, not influential accounts on social media who could generate early buzz with the right photograph and caption. School counselors, the people who sat with children in small offices with tissue boxes on the desk and posters about feelings on the wall, and the daily, unglamorous, absolutely essential work of helping young people navigate things that were too large for them to navigate alone. 300 advance copies went out in August 2024 to school counselors across 12 states. They were sent with a single note from Renata, handwritten on plain paper, photocopied 300 times, that said, "These are for the children who are carrying something heavy. I hope they help. R. Osei Whitfield." The responses started coming back within 2 weeks. They came to Dana Patel's office by email and by actual postal mail. Letters, some of them handwritten, from school counselors in Mississippi and Ohio and New Mexico and Oregon and right there in North Carolina, saying versions of the same thing in different voices, and different handwriting, and different levels of professional composure, most of which dissolved somewhere in the middle of the letter into something more personal and more true. One letter, from a school counselor in Akron, Ohio named Robert Delaney, said, "I have been doing this work for 19 years, and I have never had a child pick up a book and say, 'That's exactly it,' within the first 3 pages. This week, a 9-year-old boy named Trevor said exactly that. He asked if he could keep it. I bought him his own copy." Another, from a counselor at an elementary school in rural Georgia, said simply, "Where has this been? Where has this been for all the years before now?" Dana forwarded the letters to Renata one evening in late August. Renata read them at the folding table in the basement. She read all of them. Some of them she read twice. She did not tell anyone about the letters for several days. She kept them in a folder on the table next to the open 12th notebook, which she was still writing, because the writing had not stopped just because the publishing had started. The writing, she had come to understand, was not a project. It was a practice. It was the thing her hands did to keep the rest of her operational, and she did not intend to stop. She told her mother about the letters on a Sunday phone call. Patricia Osei listened to all of it. When Renata finished, she was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant she was choosing her next words carefully. "Jerome would have been so proud," Patricia said. Renata was quiet. "I know," she said. "That's the hardest part." "Why is it the hardest part?" Patricia asked. "Because I want to tell him," Renata said. "I want to call him and read him these letters. I still reach for the phone sometimes, not often anymore, but sometimes." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently, "Maybe that's what the last page of the first book is for. Maybe you already told him." Renata sat with that for a long time after they hung up. The books reached stores on September 9th. By September 16th, 1 week later, the first book, Where Did Daddy Go?, had sold out its initial print run of 12,000 copies. Scholastic ordered a second printing before the end of the week. The reorder was not driven by a viral moment, or a celebrity endorsement, or a coordinated campaign. It was driven by the oldest and most reliable engine in publishing: people telling other people. School counselors telling teachers. Teachers telling parents. Parents telling other parents at pickup lines and soccer games, and in the group chats that run continuously in the background of modern parenthood. Grandparents who had lost spouses telling their adult children about a book that might help explain something to the grandchildren. Librarians. Always, everywhere, librarians, who are the quiet infrastructure of every book that ever truly mattered, putting copies face out on the display shelf and watching them disappear. The reviews, when they came, were not the kind that appear in literary journals with careful academic language. They were the kind that appeared in blog posts and parent forums and the comments sections of articles, written by people who were not professional reviewers, and who wrote the way people write when they are not performing criticism, but simply reporting what something did to them. A mother in Denver wrote, "My son is 6. His father died in January. I have tried to explain it 17 different ways, and none of them landed right. I read him this book on a Tuesday night, and he looked at me when it was done and said, "Mommy, I think I understand now." I don't know how to tell you what that meant. I don't have the words. Apparently someone else did. A father in Philadelphia, who had lost his wife to cancer and was raising his 8-year-old daughter alone, wrote, "I bought this because a counselor at my daughter's school recommended it. I read it before I gave it to her, because I needed to know what she was going to be reading. I got 3 pages in and had to put it down and go stand in the kitchen for a few minutes. Then I came back and finished it. Then I gave it to my daughter. Then we read it together. Then we were both okay in a way we hadn't been okay in a while." An elementary school principal in Atlanta wrote, "We have ordered 40 copies for our school library. That is not a typo." By October 2024, the series had been adopted by school counseling programs in 43 states. By November, Scholastic had expanded the initial 6-book deal to 8 books, incorporating 2 more of Renata's original 11 notebooks, including The List, the story of the little boy named Sam who kept a record of everything he wanted to tell his father, which became, to everyone's surprise including Renata's, the book that people most often described as the one that had undone them completely. The What Love Looks Like After series was nominated for the Charlotte Award, North Carolina's Children's Book Award, voted on by young readers themselves, in November 2024. Renata found out about the nomination from one of her own 3rd graders, a boy named Caleb, who raised his hand during morning meeting and said, "Ms. Osei Whitfield, my mom says you wrote a book, and it got nominated for an award. Is that true?" The class turned and looked at her. She stood at the front of the room in her teacher's cardigan and felt something she could only describe later as a specific, located warmth. Not pride exactly, which has a reaching quality to it, but something more settled. Something like rightness. "It's true," she told them. The class erupted in the specific, uninhibited way that 3rd graders celebrate things, with noise and desk slapping, and Caleb standing up for reasons that were not entirely clear. She let it go for a full 30 seconds before she asked them to settle, which was significantly longer than her usual tolerance for desk slapping, and everyone in the room understood why. The video appeared online on April 3, 2025. It was filmed at Druid Hills Academy by a parent named Terrence Okafor, who had permission to be in the building for a classroom celebration event. Terrence was not a professional videographer. He had his phone out because his daughter Amara was in Renata's class, and he was there to watch, and had started recording the way parents record things. Casually, holding the phone slightly crooked, zooming in and out with the imprecise enthusiasm of someone who wants to capture something and is figuring out the framing as they go. The video was 63 seconds long. In it, Renata stands at the front of her 3rd grade classroom in her teacher's cardigan, the same navy blue one she had been wearing since October, the one with the slightly frayed left cuff that she had not replaced because she did not think about her cardigan the way other people thought about their wardrobes. Around her, 22 8-year-olds sit on the reading rug in the attentive, cross-legged, quietly vibrating posture of children who know something good is about to happen. She is holding a copy of Where Did Daddy Go? The published version, with its reproduced handwriting and its colored pencil illustrations printed on cream-colored pages that Scholastic had specifically chosen because Renata had asked for paper that would feel warm rather than clinical. She begins to read. Her voice is the voice she uses for reading aloud, slightly different from her regular speaking voice, lower and more deliberate. The voice of someone who understands that reading aloud to children is a specific act of care that deserves its own register. She reads the passage near the end of the book, the passage where Nadia asks the question she has been afraid to ask all year. Does Daddy know we're okay? In the classroom, the reading rug is very still. 22 children who are 8 years old, who come from 22 different homes and 22 different sets of circumstances, some of whom know loss personally and some of whom do not yet, are sitting in the specific quality of silence that a true thing creates when it is read aloud in a room. One child starts crying quietly, then another. Renata keeps reading. He knows. He's the one who made you okay. That's how he knows. She closes the book. She looks at her class. She says, "Every single one of you has people who love you that much. People who, no matter what happens, made you strong enough to be okay." And then the door at the back of the classroom opens. Steph Curry walks in. He is wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt, and the gray hoodie from March, the one he had worn to Redbud Lane, because it was the right hoodie for this kind of occasion. The kind that said, "I am a person, not an event." He is carrying a cardboard box. He sets it on the table at the back of the room. He stands by the door quietly, with his hands in his pockets, in the posture of someone who came to be present for something rather than to be seen. Half the children recognize him immediately. The other half can tell from the first half's reaction that something significant has just walked through the door. But Renata does not look up from her class. She says, "We're going to take a few deep breaths together. In through the nose. 22 children breathe in, and out through the mouth. 22 children breathe out." She gives them a moment to settle, the way she always gave them a moment to settle after something landed hard. Not rushing past the feeling, but not drowning in it either. Just acknowledging it, and then gently, firmly, bringing everyone back to the surface. Then she says, "Okay, there's something at the back table." The children turn. There is a box. There is also a man standing next to the box who plays basketball for a living, and who is, at this moment, blinking more than usual in the way that adults blink when they are in a room full of children experiencing genuine emotion and they are trying not to add their own to the pile. One for each child. Each copy has a note inside the front cover. The notes are written in blue ink, by hand, one for each child. Not the same note photocopied 22 times. 22 different notes, each one specific, each one using the child's name and a detail that only someone who had been told about that child could know. The girl who loved horses. The boy who checked clouds at recess. The child who had lost a parent. The child who had not, but whose grandmother was sick. The child who was the funniest person in the room. The child who was the quietest. Marcus Webb had provided the names and the details. Steph had written the notes the night before in his hotel room, one by one, at a desk, which had taken him 2.5 hours, and which was the most important 2.5 hours he had spent that entire year, and he knew it while he was doing it. Terence Okafor's video ends before the children open their books. It ends on the image of 22 8-year-olds reaching into a cardboard box. It ends on Renata Osei Whitfield's face, which is turned away from the camera, looking at her children, wearing an expression that Terence later described simply as, "The way a person looks when they realize something they built in the dark has made it all the way to the light." Terence uploaded the video that evening without a long caption, just the title of the book and the school's name, and a single sentence. "Something happened in a Charlotte classroom today that I think the world should see." By the following morning, the video had been viewed 1 million times. By the evening, 4 million. By the end of the week, it had been shared across every platform, translated into 11 languages by people who did not wait for official translations because they needed to share it with someone specific right now, and had generated an amount of commentary that publishing industry analysts described as unprecedented for a children's book. But the number that mattered most, the one that Renata put on a sticky note and pressed to the bottom corner of the kitchen window, where she could see it while she made coffee every morning, was a different number entirely. It was the number of messages she received from parents, counselors, teachers, and children in the 3 weeks following the video. That number was 4,217. She read every one. She could not respond to all of them. Dana Patel's office helped manage the volume. But Renata read them, at the folding table in the basement, under the warm lamp, after Imani and Ezra were in bed, because they deserved to be read by the person they were written to. Because every message was a person saying, "This found me when I needed to be found." And that was the whole point. That was what the composition notebooks in the plastic bin had always been for. And Renata Osei Whitfield was not a person who let the whole point go unwitnessed. One message arrived not by email, but by actual postal mail, postmarked from San Francisco, California. It was a single handwritten page on plain white paper. It said, "Renata, I have been trying to write this letter for 3 weeks, and I keep starting over, because nothing I write feels adequate to what I want to say. So I'm going to stop trying to make it adequate, and just say the true thing. I showed those books to my kids, all 3 of them, Riley, Ryan, and Cannon. We read the first one together on a Sunday morning. When it was done, Cannon, who is 7 and who has not yet learned to be careful with his honesty, looked at me and said, 'Dad, is this about someone you know?' I said yes. He said, 'Is she okay?' I thought about that for a moment. About you, and Imani, and Ezra. About the basement, and the folding table, and the worn-down colored pencils. About a girl who held a sign that said, 'Shoot at Wardell,' at a JV basketball game a very long time ago. I said, 'She's more than okay. She built something extraordinary in the dark, and brought it into the light. And the light turned out to be exactly the right place for it.' Cannon said, 'Good.' And then he asked for a snack. I thought you should know that. I thought you should know that a 7-year-old in San Francisco, California, decided you were okay, and then immediately moved on with his day, which is the most uncomplicated form of faith I have ever witnessed, and which I think is exactly what you deserve. The books are extraordinary. You are extraordinary. Jerome knew that. Your kids know that. Now the world knows it. Your friend, Steph." Renata read this letter twice at the folding table. Then she folded it carefully and placed it inside the front cover of the 12th composition notebook, the one that was still in progress, still mid-sentence, still being built night by night in the warm basement light. She picked up the burnt orange pencil. She found her place on the open page. She kept writing. Outside, through the small basement window set high in the wall, she could see the bottom edge of the driveway and the weighted base of the basketball hoop. The net moved in the small, soft wind. It always moved in the wind. Some things stay exactly where they were put, and move with whatever comes, and hold their shape, and remain. Charlotte, North Carolina in the fall of 2025 smelled the same way it always had. Cut grass and coming rain, and the particular warm concrete smell of a city that has been absorbing heat all summer and is only now, in October, beginning to release it. The oak trees on Tyvola Road, where Emmanuel and Patricia Osei still lived, were turning the slow, serious amber that Charlotte oaks turned every fall, and the swing in the backyard that Emmanuel had hung for Renata 30 years ago and never taken down was moving in the same small wind that moved the basketball net on Redbud Lane 2 miles away. Some winds travel that way, connecting things without announcing it. Renata Osei Whitfield was 37 years old. She still taught 3rd grade at Druid Hills Academy. She still arrived first and left last. The granola bars and peanut butter crackers and apple juice boxes were still in the bottom drawer of her desk, still placed there quietly enough that a child could reach for them without ceremony. The birthday cards were still handmade, still specific, still taped to each child's desk before they arrived on their birthday morning. Some things you do not change because they were right the first time. The What Love Looks Like After series had, by October 2025, sold just over 400,000 copies across 8 books. It had been translated into 14 languages. It had won 2 awards: the Charlotte Award, voted on by North Carolina's young readers, and the Dolly Gray Children's Literature Award, which recognized books that served children with special needs, including those navigating grief and loss. Both trophies sat on the windowsill of Renata's classroom, not on a shelf at home, because she had decided they belonged in the room where children were rather than in a room where she was, which was entirely consistent with how she thought about everything. The series had been added to the recommended resources list of the National Association of School Psychologists. A pediatric hospital in Atlanta had ordered copies for every patient room in their children's oncology ward. Not just for the patients, but for the siblings, the cousins, the children who came to visit and sat in waiting rooms trying to understand what the adults around them were so quietly afraid of. A school in rural Kentucky had used a grant to buy one copy of every book in the series for every student in their elementary school, 412 children, and had held a reading morning where every classroom in the building read a different book simultaneously. The principal had described it afterward as the quietest and most important morning this school has ever had. Renata knew about all of these things because Dana Patel sent her updates, and because Carol Simmons at Scholastic called monthly with numbers and news, and the kind of genuine enthusiasm that publishers sometimes lose over time, but that Carol had not lost, possibly because she read the letters too. Renata received them all the same way she had received the first 4,217, sitting at the folding table in the basement, under the warm lamp, reading them one by one, being present for each one. The basement had changed slightly in the year since the books came out. Jerome's tools were still on the workbench, still parallel, still his. She had not moved them and did not intend to. But the toy chest he had been building for Ezra, the pale, unvarnished, half-finished one that had stood against the wall for 4 years, exactly as he had left it, had been completed. Not by Renata, who would have been the first to acknowledge that woodworking was not among her considerable skills. It had been completed by Emmanuel Osei, who had driven over on a Saturday in January 2025, and spent the day in the basement with the tools laid out exactly as Jerome had left them, working from what Jerome had started, finishing what Jerome had planned. Emmanuel had not announced he was going to do this. He had simply appeared at the door with his reading glasses pushed up on his head and asked Renata if she still had Jerome's sandpaper. She did. Of course she did. Emmanuel finished the toy chest in 1 day. He sanded it smooth. He applied 2 coats of a warm, honey-colored varnish that Renata had chosen because it was the color that seemed closest to the wood's own best self. He fitted the hinges Jerome had bought, but not yet installed. When it was done, he carried it upstairs and put it in Ezra's room, in the corner Jerome had measured for it. Ezra came home from Gloria's house that evening and walked into his room and stopped. He walked to the chest. He ran his hands over the top of it, the way small children run their hands over things they are learning the shape of. "Did Daddy make this?" he asked. Emmanuel, standing in the doorway, looked at his grandson. "He started it," Emmanuel said. "We finished it." Ezra nodded, with the gravity of a 6-year-old who has decided this answer is satisfactory and complete. Then he opened the lid and put his stuffed dinosaur inside. Imani Whitfield turned 9 in the spring of 2025. She was, by every available measure, exactly what Renata and Jerome had been in the process of building before the building was interrupted. A person of considerable internal weather, deeply feeling and carefully observing and absolutely certain of her own assessments in the way of people who have had to grow up faster than scheduled and have found that growing up faster, while costly, also produces a specific kind of clarity. She had her father's careful smile and her mother's direct eyes, and a laugh that arrived suddenly and completely, catching people off guard. She played basketball on a youth league team called the West Charlotte Wildcats, coached by a man named Dennis Park, who had spent 20 years coaching youth sports in the neighborhood, and who told Renata after the second practice that Imani had the instincts of someone who has been watching basketball their whole life, and the confidence of someone who has never been told they couldn't play. Renata had nodded and said, Her dad put up a hoop in the driveway. Dennis had nodded back, understanding that this was the whole explanation. Imani played point guard. She was small for her age, which gave her a speed advantage she had identified, and was exploiting with clear tactical pleasure. She had worked out the geometry of the bent rim on the driveway hoop with the thoroughness of a scientist. She knew exactly where to aim from every angle, had practiced it so many times that the bent rim was no longer a limitation but a specific skill, a piece of knowledge that belonged only to her. She won a game in March 2025, with a shot from the free throw line that went in off the bent rim's particular angle, and that no opposing player could have predicted, because no opposing player had spent 2 years studying that specific rim in a driveway on Redbud Lane. After the game, she ran to Renata with the uninhibited full-body joy of a 9-year-old who has just done something she is proud of. And Renata held her and felt, as she had been feeling with increasing frequency over the past year, the specific sensation of a life reassembling itself. Not into what it had been before October 2021, because it would never be that again, and she had stopped expecting it to be, but into something new that carried the shape of the old within it, the way a river carries the shape of the land it carved. Jerome would have been at that game. He would have been standing on the sideline in his off-duty clothes with his arms crossed and his careful smile and his absolute inability to stay quiet when his daughter did something extraordinary, which meant he would not have stayed quiet for very much of the game at all. Renata knew this the way she knew the 9 o'clock angle of the kitchen light and the sound of Ezra's particular laugh. She carried it the same way, not as weight, not anymore, but as dimension, as the thing that gave the moment its full depth. She had written a new book about this feeling. It was not in the What Love Looks Like After series. It was something different, a story about a mother and a daughter at a basketball game, about all the people you wish could see you when you do something worth seeing, and about how wanting them there, and them not being there, and you doing the thing anyway, is its own kind of courage, that doesn't have a name yet but deserves one. She had not shown it to Dana yet. She was not finished with it. She was working on it at the folding table, in the evenings, after the children were in bed. The lamp was on. Ezra Whitfield turned 7 in October 2025. He had his father's face and his mother's laugh and an inexhaustible interest in dinosaurs that showed no signs of moderating with age. He had started first grade at Druid Hills Academy in September, not in Renata's class, because the school had a policy about teachers and their own children, and also because Renata had specifically requested it, understanding that Ezra needed the experience of a classroom where he was simply a student and not the teacher's son. His first-grade teacher was a young woman named Ms. Priya Nair, who was in her 2nd year of teaching, and who came to Renata's classroom in the first week of school, and said, with the earnest intensity of a new teacher, who was also a reader, and knew exactly whose child she had just been assigned, Ms. Osei Whitfield, I just want you to know that your books are the reason I became a teacher. I read them in college and I thought, that is the kind of person I want to be in a room with children. Renata had looked at this young woman, 23 years old, 2nd year, the whole long, beautiful, difficult road of teaching still ahead of her, and felt something move through her chest that she did not have an immediate word for. Later, she decided the word was continuation. Take good care of him, Renata said. He talks a lot. I know, Priya said. He's been talking since he walked in on the first day. He gets that from his father, Renata said. On Ezra's 7th birthday, Renata did what she had done on his 6th birthday and his 5th. She woke up early before the children stirred and went to the basement and sat at the folding table and wrote him a letter, not a book, a letter, addressed directly to Ezra, telling him one specific thing she had observed about him in the past year that she wanted him to know she had seen. The letter for his 7th birthday was about the morning in August, when Ezra had found a bird on the back porch that had flown into the window and was sitting stunned on the concrete. and how Ezra had gone inside and gotten a small dish of water and placed it near the bird without touching the bird, and then sat 3 feet away and waited, quietly, for 45 minutes, until the bird recovered and flew away. He had not told anyone he was doing this. Renata had watched from the kitchen window without going outside, understanding that some things needed to happen without an audience. When the bird flew away, Ezra had watched it go. Then he had gone back inside and said, "It's okay now." The letter told him that she had seen this, that she had been watching from the window, that what he had done, the patience of it, the care of it, the understanding that some things needed quiet and space and time rather than intervention, was one of the most genuinely kind things she had ever witnessed from anyone of any age. She told him it was his father's kind of kindness. She wrote, "Your daddy understood that bravery and gentleness are the same thing. You are proving it every day." She sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in the box under the folding table where she kept all the letters, one for each birthday, for each child, going back to 2022. She would give them the box when they were older, and they were old enough to read them with the full weight of understanding. It was Jerome's idea, originally. He had told her once, in the easy late-night conversation of two people lying in the dark, talking about the future, that he wanted to write his children letters, not for special occasions, for ordinary observations, for the small, true things he noticed about them that he wanted them to know he had seen. He had not gotten to write them, so Renata was writing them. She was writing his letters and hers together, which was another way of finishing what Jerome had started. Another joint construction in the ongoing project of raising two people who would carry their father's love in the architecture of who they became. In October 2025, Steph Curry was asked at a Golden State Warriors press conference about projects outside basketball that he was currently proud of. It was not a planted question. It was asked by a young sports reporter named Jasmine Park from a Bay Area publication who had recently written a feature on athlete philanthropy and who had done enough research to know there was something worth asking about. Steph paused. He was sitting at the press conference table in the post-game setup, still in his warm-up jacket, a bottle of water in front of him, the ordinary machinery of a post-game media session arranged around him. He had answered 6 questions in the previous 10 minutes about the team's defensive rotations and an upcoming road trip, and his thoughts on a younger player's development. Then Jasmine Park asked her question, and Steph paused. Not the brief collecting pause of someone finding a diplomatic answer. The longer, genuine pause of someone deciding how much of a true thing to give to a room full of people with recording equipment. He decided on all of it. "There's a book series," he said, "written by a woman in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her name is Renata Osei Whitfield. She's a 3rd-grade teacher. She lost her husband, a firefighter named Jerome, in 2021, and she spent 2.5 years writing children's books about grief and love and how kids survive loss, in a basement, by hand, at midnight, after her kids were asleep. Because she looked for a book that said what her children needed to hear, and she couldn't find it, so she made it. The press room was quiet in the specific way that press rooms get quiet when something is being said that is not a prepared statement. I got to be in the room when someone showed me what she'd built," Steph continued. "And it was one of the most extraordinary things I have ever seen, and I've seen some things." He paused. There was a small sound of laughter in the room, and then it went quiet again, because people understood he was not finished. "The series is called What Love Looks Like After," he said. "I wrote the foreword for the first book. That is the smallest thing I did in relation to those books. The work is entirely hers. I just got to be someone who saw it before the rest of the world did, which is a privilege I think about more than I can explain in a press conference." Jasmine Park, who had been a reporter for 4 years and had interviewed a significant number of famous people, and had learned to recognize the difference between a person performing authenticity and a person simply being authentic, wrote one word in her notebook at this moment. The word was real. "Buy it for someone you love," Steph said. "You'll understand." The recording of this press conference was viewed 2 million times in the following 48 hours. Scholastic reported a 40% spike in series sales in the week following. Carol Simmons called Renata on a Thursday morning. Renata was in the middle of teaching a reading lesson. She let it go to voicemail. She called back at lunch, sitting at her desk, eating her sandwich, looking at the bottom drawer where the granola bars were. Carol told her the numbers. Renata listened. "That's wonderful," she said, and meant it, and then asked Carol how her own children were doing, because Renata knew Carol had a daughter who had started middle school in September, and Carol had mentioned being nervous about it. Carol laughed, surprised, warmed, the laugh of someone who has just been reminded that the person they are talking to is genuinely interested in them rather than just their numbers. They talked for 20 minutes. When Renata hung up, she sat for a moment in her classroom, in the particular quiet of a school lunch period, with the children's drawings on the refrigerator, and the words on the walls, and the small shoes that would come back through the door in 40 minutes, and fill the room with noise and need, and the daily irreplaceable work of being young, in a world that was large, and sometimes hard, and always, always worth paying attention to. She thought about Jerome. She thought about the letter she had written Ezra that morning about the bird on the porch. She thought about Imani making that free throw shot off the bent rim, with the knowledge that only 2 years of practice in a specific driveway could give a person. She thought about the 12th notebook on the folding table, mid-sentence, waiting. She thought about all the letters she still had to write, all the birthdays still coming, all the mornings she would wake up early and go to the basement and put words on paper, because the words needed somewhere to go, and she had somewhere to put them. She thought, Jerome knew. He knew before he could have known. He built 2 people strong enough to be okay, and he built a woman who would finish what needed finishing, and he did all of it just by loving them the way he loved them. She thought, he knows. She opened the bottom drawer. She checked the granola bars. She restocked the ones that were running low. She closed the drawer. She picked up her reading binder. She waited for the children to come back through the door. The yellow house on Redbud Lane looked the same in October 2025 as it had looked in March 2024, when a man in a gray hoodie had walked up the porch steps, carrying groceries and yellow tulips, and 15 years of silence. The same concrete porch. The same black metal railing Jerome had repainted. The same 2 plastic chairs, green and blue, angled toward each other in the position they had been in for 3 years. The basketball hoop was still in the driveway. The rim was still slightly bent. Nobody had fixed it. Not because nobody could, not because it had been forgotten, because Imani had asked, in the specific and serious way she asked things that mattered to her, that it stay the way it was. "It's how Daddy put it up," she said, "and I know how to shoot on it." That was the whole argument. That was all it needed to be. The net moved in the October wind, the same small, unhurried wind that moved through Charlotte every fall, through the oak trees on Tavola Road, and down the streets of West Charlotte, and across the parking lot of Druid Hills Academy, and through the chain-link fence and over. The reading rug and along the hallway past the height chart on the doorframe, and down the basement stairs to where a lamp stayed on late, and a woman kept writing, and a plastic bin sat open on a shelf, no longer covered by a gray station shirt, its contents finally free to be what they had always been. Not just notebooks, not just a mother's midnight work, not just grief made into something usable. All of that, yes, all of that exactly. And also, a father's fingerprints, on every page, in every careful smile that Nadia's father gave across a room, in every story that Sam added to his list, in every brave and gentle thing that Jerome Whitfield had practiced every day of his 34 years, that had passed into 2 small bodies and 1 steady heart and 11 composition notebooks and 14 languages and 400,000 copies and a first-grade classroom where a boy named Ezra talked from the moment he walked in, and a youth basketball court where a girl named Imani made shots that nobody else could make because she had learned the angle from a hoop her father put up in a driveway on Redbud Lane. Jerome Whitfield had not written the books, but they were his testimony too. That was the whole point. That was what love looked like after. On the morning of October 14th, 2025, the 4th anniversary of the night Jerome Whitfield did not come home, Renata woke before dawn. She did not go to the basement. She went to the backyard. She sat in the grass under the oak tree with her coffee, and she stayed there as the dark slowly became gray, and the gray slowly became the particular warm amber of an October Charlotte morning. And she did not write anything, or read anything, or plan anything. She just sat. After a while, she heard the back door open. Imani came out first, still in her pajamas, her hair loose, carrying her own cup, not coffee, hot chocolate, but in a proper mug, because she had decided recently that she was old enough for a proper mug. She sat down in the grass beside her mother without a word. Then the back door opened again. Ezra came out in his dinosaur pajamas, and his untied shoes, and carrying his stuffed dinosaur, which went everywhere with him. And he sat down on Renata's other side and leaned against her arm with the complete, trusting weight of a 7-year-old who has never had reason to doubt that his mother's arm will be there to lean on. The three of them sat under the oak tree in the backyard of the yellow house on Redbud Lane as the morning came up over Charlotte. Nobody said anything for a long time. Then Ezra said, looking at the sky with the dinosaur under his arm, "Do you think Daddy can see us right now?" Renata put her arm around him. She looked at the sky, the wide, ordinary, extraordinary October sky over Charlotte, over Redbud Lane, over the basketball hoop, and the folding table, and the 11 finished books, and the 12th one still in progress, and all the mornings still to come. She thought about what Jerome would have said if he were sitting here. She knew exactly what he would have said. She had written it into the last page of the first book, in burnt orange pencil, at a folding table in a basement at midnight, 2 years after he died, because it was the truest thing she knew, and true things need somewhere to live. "He knows," she said. She held her children in the grass under the oak tree. The morning kept coming. Some things stay exactly where they were put, and move with whatever comes, and hold their shape and remain. And the net on the basketball hoop in the driveway moved in the small, soft wind. And the light came up over Charlotte, and it was enough. It was more than enough. And that is the story of what was in the basement on Redbud Lane. A woman who lost everything and built something extraordinary in the dark. 2 children who carry their father in the way they laugh, and the way they love, and the way they make shots off a bent rim that nobody else knows how to make. And a world that needed exactly what one third-grade teacher from Charlotte, North Carolina, made at midnight with colored pencils and a composition notebook and a love that refused to stop building things. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. It could be Charlotte. It could be halfway across the world. It doesn't matter. Because this story belongs to every single person who has ever loved someone, lost someone, or quietly built something in the dark and wondered if it would ever find the light. We read every comment, every single one. If this story moved you the way it moved us, if it made you think of someone you love, someone you miss, or something you are quietly building yourself, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells the world that stories like this one matter, that kindness matters, that the quiet, ordinary, extraordinary things people do when nobody is watching deserve to be seen. And if you want more stories like this one, real stories, human stories, the kind that remind you what people are actually capable of when love is the thing doing the building, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss one. Because there are more stories out there like Renata's. There are basements full of extraordinary things in cities you have never heard of, built by people the world has not found yet. We are going to find them. Come with us. And while you are here, that video appearing on your screen right now is the perfect next story for anyone who just felt something watching this one. Click it. We will see you there.